The Red Lantern Saloon smelled of stale whiskey and summer sweat, its warped pine floor packed shoulder to shoulder with men who treated misery like entertainment. On a makeshift crate at the room's center stood Lila Grace Whitmore, 18, her snow-white hair glowing ghost-like beneath a sputtering kerosene lamp. She clutched the frayed hem of her only calico dress, while the auctioneer's gavel hovered in the smoky air. $30 once twice, he barked, voice cracking like a dry whip. The crowd jeered, eager to see the girl with skin pale as fresh milk sold off to cover her dead father's gambling markers. But just before the hammer fell, a single calloused hand rose from the back corner. The saloon went still, no cough, no clink of glass-every eye fixing on the silent farmer in the battered Stetson. In that hush, Lila's heart thudded like hoofbeats, caught between dread and the impossible spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, her fate had changed direction. The man who'd halted the auction was known around Deadwood Hollow only as Elias Boone, that reclusive farmer whose acreage sat 5 dusty miles beyond the last wind-worn fence post. Folks whispered about the fire that stole his wife and little girl how, after burying them beneath the only cottonwood on his land, he'd spoken to no one but his mule for 3 long years. Tonight, though, Elias had walked the full distance into town, boots caked with red clay, brim of his sun-bleached hat pulled low over eyes the color of storm steel. He nursed a single shot of rye he never tasted, watching the bidding with a stillness that made even seasoned drifters edge away. When the auctioneer barked $30 twice sold, Elias set down his untouched glass, the clink echoing like church bells in the sudden quiet, and raised that weather-scarred hand. He unfastened a small leather pouch from his belt and let it fall into his palm. The weight alone hinted at months of harvest profits. $50, he said, voice rough as gravel, yet clear as a prayer on Sunday, the sound sliced through cigarette smoke and cynicism alike. Gasps fluttered along the bar. $50 enough to fence 20 acres or buy a new team of mule swaths, more money than most ranch hands saw in half a year. Even Royce Rattler Kane, the outlaw who'd been certain of his bargain prey, blinked at the sudden doubling. Rattler's gold tooth caught lamplight as he sneered. "Well now, Farmer Boone," he drawled, loud enough for every onlooker. "Didn't figure a hermit had that kind of silver rattlin' around." Elias neither flinched nor smiled. He simply stepped forward, booth heels thudding the pine boards, and poured the coin pouch into his wide, calloused palm. Gold dollars and eagles gleamed like tiny suns. Each metallic clink marked his intent. This was no joke, no bluff, but the earnest payment of a man who had tilled soil and buried sorrow enough to know the price of a life. He held the coins out toward the auctioneer, who hand trembling accepted the unexpected bounty. From her perch on the crate, Lila Grace felt the saloon tilt on its very axis. She'd prepared herself for the hands of a lecher, for the stink of cheap whiskey on her skin. Yet the tall, silent figure below her radiated, not hunger but something older, deeper grief hammered into quiet resolve. She caught a glimpse of his profile, the etched lines of wind and loss, and felt for the first time since her father's debts swallowed Hera flicker of safety. Behind them, Rattler's jealous laughter rose, sour and sharp. "Payin' $50 for damaged goods, Boone? Seems your mornings turned your brains to mush." His hand hovered over the pearl, gripped Colt on his belt. Around the room, chairs scraped and boots shifted. Dust motes hung in lantern light, waiting for the next breath to stir them. And with that breath, every man in Deadwood Hollow sensed the night was about to crack wide open. Royce Rattler Kane eased one boot from the rail and stalked into the lamplight, all sinew and swagger, the room's hush parting for him like wheat for a whetstone. At 6'2", he was lean as a whip crack, his duster stitched from the hides of men who'd tested him and lost. The diamondback pattern etched on his holster winked whenever the saloon's ceiling fan squeaked past a kerosene lamp, reminding every bystander how he'd earned his nickname Fast, Venomous, Deadly. Rattler's gold tooth flashed as he spat a stream of tobacco into the spittoon, the clang reverberating through the red lantern like a funeral bell. $50, he drawled, rolling the number around his tongue as though it tasted bitter. That's a fat pile of coin for a girl with skin pale as a trout's belly, Farmer Boone. Laughter, nervous and thin, scratched along the walls. Rattler's eyes, a yellowish hazel that never blinked, long fixed on Elias, then drifted past him to the slack-jawed patrons. "Y'all see this? A dirt plower thinks he can walk in and buy what belongs to me? Reckon he forgot Deadwood Hollow's got house rules." Elias Boone didn't reply. He simply returned the pouch to his belt and lifted Lila Grace from the crate careful, steady, as though she were a china cup half full of hope. Up close, he smelled of tilled earth and ashwood smoke. Lila heard her own pulse drumming in her ears. Boo Toddley felt no urge to pull away. Rattler took 2 steps closer, boots clicking like a metronome of menace. "Put her down." The outlaw unbuckled the leather thong that kept his Colt holstered, the faint snap echoing across the saloon like ice breaking on a winter pond. "You want her, Boone? We settle it the Deadwood way. High noon, middle of Main Street. Winner walks off with the girl. Loser?" He tapped the ivory grip of his .45. "Gets a pine box and 6 feet of prairie." Gasps rippled. One gambler's whiskey glass clattered onto the bar. Sheriff Eli Watts-Little, more than Rattler's lapdog made, a show of clearing his throat, but never touched his badge. He wasn't paid to keep peace. He was paid to stay out of Rattler's path. Elias set Lila gently behind the piano, where the saloon girl, Ruby May, shielded her with a trembling hand. Then he stepped into the open space. Rattler left, the 2 men now 10 paces apart. Elias spoke, voice low but carrying. "I came to pay a debt, not spill blood. Let the auctioneer call the sale, and I'll ride out peaceable." Rattler grinned, gold tooth glinting. "Peaceable? Ain't nothing peaceable about buying another man's property under his own roof. Noon. Street. Or you crawl back to your cabbage rows and pray I forget your face." From the corner, Jeremiah Buckshot, Sims Rattler's hulking lieutenant, laughed loud enough to rattle window panes. "Hope the hermit's coffin's extra wide," he sneered. "Gotta fit all that foolish pride." Silence again. Dust motes hovered in sunbeams, slashing through the half-open shutters. Elias scanned the room note of the exits, the sniper perches, the fear coiled in every local's shoulders. Then he tipped his hat, more to Lila than Rattler. "High noon," he agreed, voice rough as barbed wire sliding through calloused fingers. "But understand this. If a single soul fires early, there won't be enough shovels in this town to bury the aftermath." Rattler's smile faltered for the first time, sensing a depth of resolve forged in battlefields, unknown to barroom braggarts. He spat again, missing the spittoon. "We'll see whose nerve holds, dirt farmer." As Elias escorted Lila toward the stairwell that led to the boarding rooms above shelter until noon, she caught the faint tremor in his damaged shooting hand. Yet the steel in his eyes outshone any weakness. For the first time since her father's debts had dragged her toward ruin, Lila dared to breathe a prayer, "Let courage be contagious." And in the hush that followed, half the saloon silently echoed it. High noon painted Deadwood Hollow in punishing light, the July sun hanging like a molten coin above the single-block Main Street. Storefront awnings sagged in the heat, as nearly every soul in town crowded the dusty thoroughfare ladies, fanning themselves on balconies, ranch hands lining hitch rails, children peeking from behind rain barrels they'd been told to avoid. Lila Grace watched from the second-story window of the Red Lantern, her pale lashes blinking against the glare, each heartbeat thumping louder than the church bell that had just tolled 12. Elias Boone stepped from the saloon's swinging doors, with deliberate, calm, long shadow stretching ahead of him. He wore no gun-belt showpiece, only the battered army holster he'd carried through darker fields. Across the street, Royce, Rattler Kane, adjusted the brim of his black hat and sauntered to center ground, spurs singing a menacing chime. Sheriff Watts stood 10 paces off, sweating through his starched collar. Outwardly, the referee, but inwardly praying no bullet strayed his way. A hush settled, broken only by the rustle of hot wind. Rattler's smile was razor thin. "Fancy seeing you in daylight, Boone," thought hermits preferred the shade. He stroked the ivory grip of his Colt, fingers itching for glory. Elias's reply rolled deep and steady, heard clear to the feed store porch. "Daylight's the best place to show folks what crawls out after dark." He paused, letting the words seep in, then continued louder. 7 years ago, Fort Griffin. A supply convoy ambushed. 32 soldiers murdered for payroll gold. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some remembered the headlines. Others only the whispered horror. Elias unbuttoned his faded shirt cuff, revealing the small, puckered scar where a bullet had grazed him that day. "I was Sergeant Boone of the 5th Cavalry. One witness the raiders didn't finish." Rattler's eyes narrowed to slits. "You've got a long memory, farmer." "And you've got blood that never washed out," Elias answered. "Your gang wore crimson bandanas that morning, same pattern stitched on your holster now. I testified. Saw 2 of your men hang. You slipped the noose." He pointed a weathered finger at Rattler's chest. "This duel isn't about purchasing freedom. It's about settling accounts that interest won't erase." A collective breath drew in. Respect flickered across faces that once feared Royce Kane. Even Sheriff Watts shifted, as though his badge suddenly carried weight. Rattler's bravado cracked a hairline. "Talk's cheap, guns speak truer." He squared his stance, thumbed the safety strap from his Colt. Elias mirrored him, right hand hovering near the worn grip of his Army revolver, 3 fingers and a thumb steady despite the faint tremor. Overhead, a lone hawk cried, circling as if scouting final resting places. Inside the red lantern, Lila pressed her palm to the window pane, silently willing strength into the silent farmer who had wagered $50 and, perhaps his life on the belief that a girl's worth could never be measured in gold. The town held its breath. The next heartbeat would belong to the faster manner to fate itself. A single bead of sweat crawled down Elias Boone's temple as he and Royce Rattler Kane squared off, 10 paces apart on the scorched dirt. For the breadth of a heartbeat, nothing moved and Rattler's eyelids flickered, barely perceptible, toward the livery roof. It was enough. Elias's cavalry instinct screamed ambush. At that instant, a rifle barked from above. The sniper's bullet whined past Elias's left ear and slammed into a pickle barrel behind him, brine geysering into the heat. Most men would have flinched or dived for cover. Elias pivoted, his right hand a blur despite the missing finger-scleared leather, and he snapped off a single shot. 70 feet away, the livery roof gunman toppled like a rag doll, Winchester clattering after him. Chaos detonated down Main Street. Women screamed, gamblers scattered, and ranch hands dove behind water troughs. Rattler drew but too late. Until that moment, he'd always trusted his speed. Now fear jammed his reflexes like sand in a gear. Elias's second round punched through Rattler's gun arm, spinning the Colt from his grasp and splattering crimson across his black duster. The outlaw's howl echoed off false front buildings. For the first time since Deadwood Hollow had bent beneath Kane's rule, the townsfolk saw their tormentor bleed. Old Mr. Gleason, the feed store owner, stepped from his doorway, double-barreled 12-gauge in trembling hands. Ruby May pushed saloon doors wide, revolver leveled even though her wrists quivered. Sheriff Watts' eyes wide, badge suddenly heavier than Tintook, a half-step forward, then another, lifting his aging Remington. The air shifted. The town, long compressed by fear, began to expand. But Rattler wasn't finished. Clutching his shredded arm, He staggered toward his lieutenant, Buckshot Sims, who emerged from the mercantile alley with 2 more gang members. "Kill him," Rattler rasped. Buckshot leveled his Spencer, sighting on Elias unaware that 12-year-old Tommy Howell had climbed atop a water barrel behind him. The boy swung a slingshot, marble whistling. It struck Buckshot's temple with a surprising thunk. The shot went high, shattering the telegraph office window instead of Elias's chest. Elias advanced 3 strides, steady as a thunderhead. Buckshot regained focus, but Elias's 3rd bullet found the outlaw's shoulder. The big man crashed backward into a stack of flour sacks. The remaining gunman spun on his heel to flee, only to meet Sheriff Watts's shaking revolver. "Drop it," Watts commanded. To everyone's astonishment, including his own, the outlaw obeyed. Rattler stumbled, blood dripping through his fingers. He stared in disbelief as townspeople he'd bullied for years stepped from cover with guns, pitchforks, or sheer fury. Even meek Miss Fletcher, the milliner, wielded her hatpin like a saber. The collective wall of villagers pressed forward, corral style, hemming the wounded outlaw in a shrinking circle of judgment. On the Red Lantern balcony, Lila Grace watched, alabaster knuckles white against the railing. She saw Elias, dust-coated, eyes burning with a soldier's resolve turned slightly, scanning the rooftops for more treachery. Despite everything, he still protected the very people now gathering courage behind him. Her heart surged. Hope, once a flicker, blazed. Rattler's bravado crumbled to raw panic. "Y'all think this ends today?" he raged, voice cracking. "My riders'll torch this town by nightfall?" "No," Elias replied, holstering his smoking Colt. "Your riders just learned fear has a price." He nodded toward the crowd. "And I reckon Deadwood Hollow is through paying it." Silence settled, thicker than gun smoke. Then Ruby May broke it with a cheer that climbed the porch beams like wildfire. Applause rolled down the street, ragged yet defiant. Sheriff Watts strode forward, cuffs in hand, shoulders finally squared beneath the tarnished star. Rattler, pale and trembling, offered no resistance. Elias exhaled a breath held 7 years, the weight of Fort Griffin's ghosts easing at last. He glanced up to the balcony where Lila stood, meeting her frosted blue gaze. In that locked moment she understood. The duel had never been about who was quickest. It was about who would stand and who would inspire others to stand beside him. Behind Elias, a once broken town straightened its spine, the first note of a new anthem rising in the hot Texas air. Royce Rattler. Kane knelt in the dust like a rattlesnake, with its spine broken, right sleeve dark with blood, breath coming in wet rasps. Sheriff Watts bound the outlaw's wounded wrist with rawhide, but every eye in Deadwood Hollow turned not to the sheriff, nor to the outlaw, but to Elias Boone, man who had cut Fear's throat at high noon. Elias stood astride away, revolver still warm in its holster, hat brim shadowing eyes that had seen too many endings. Sunday hammered down, heat shimmered off the street at better than 95° Fahrenheit, yet a hush hung cold. The townsfolk waited to see which law would rule this day, the frontier's bullet or the Bible's mercy. Rattler sensed the crowd's need for closure and hissed through cracked lips, "Go on, Boone, finish it, put a round in my skull, and call it justice." He coughed, then spit crimson onto Elias's boot. "Show 'em you're no better than I am." Elias didn't flinch, but the insult rolled across the crowd, stirring old grudges. From behind the water trough, Blacksmith Collins shouted, "He murdered my cousin last winterlet. The ground drink his blood." A widow near the depot sobbed, pressing a hanky to her mouth. Even Sheriff Watts's resolve wavered. His hand hovered near his sidearm, as though wishing someone else would pull the trigger. Before the clamor could crest, a soft voice drifted from the Red Lantern's balcony. Lila Grace Whitmore, face pale as mountain snow, called down, "Let the law judge him, not anger. Her albinism made her eyes shimmer, almost silver in the sunlight, and for a moment the mob stilled, transfixed. Rattler sensed weakness and twisted the knife. "Ask your snow-skin angel about her daddy's law, Boone." He turned his sneer upward. "Tell them, Lila, how dear old Pa paid his poker debts by selling off Chinese rail workers to the mine owners south of here. 50 men buried alive when a shaft collapsed. That's the blood on your family's hands." The words cracked through the square like a misfired shot. Lila swayed, gripping the railing. Elias's jaw tightened. The town murmured, suspicion and pity churning together. Rattler chuckled, tasting victory even while kneeling. "See, Boone? Mercy for me means guilt for her. You gun me down, the town calls you a hero. Spare me, and they find a new victim to hate." Elias looked from Rattler's gleaming gold tooth to the widening ring of townsfolk good people who had just taken their first collective step toward courage. He remembered Fort Griffin, the bodies, the rage that nearly drowned him. He also remembered a chaplain's words over a field grave. "Justice without mercy breeds more graves than it fills." Slowly, he drew his revolver not to aim, but to eject the spent shells. Each cartridge pinged onto the baked earth. The gesture rang louder than a sermon. "Sheriff," he said, voice carrying clear past the storefronts, "lock him in the freight shed. Wire the U.S. Marshal in Abilene. He'll want Vaughn's payroll killer alive." Watts swallowed, then nodded, hauling Rattler to his feet. A ripple of unease rolled across the crowd. Danger, hungry for blood, denied its feast. But Doc Maynard stepped forward, Bible in one hand, stained bandage in the other. "The man who saved your children today has given us a chance to choose law over vengeance," he said. "Don't waste it." Elias met Lila's watery gaze. "Your father's sins belong to him, not to you," he said softly. "Truth cuts both ways, but it needn't kill the innocent." She managed a nod, though pain flickered behind her eyes. Sheriff Watts prodded Rattler toward the depot, but the outlaw cocked his head, eyes burning with undimmed malice. "You think bars can hold a storm, Boone? I've got men, and men have matches." He flashed that gold-toothed grin. "This town'll beg me back before sundown." Elias watched them vanish into the crowd, knowing the line between mercy and folly is thinner than fishing line in spring wind. He holstered his empty gun, but unease settled in his gut like uncut whiskey. Above him, the church bell began its slow toll for the afternoon service. Inside that sound lurked a warning. Sometimes the serpent you spare slithers back after dark, fangs sharper for the mercy shown at noon. Late afternoon, heat still shimmered off the wagon ruts when the freight shed lock snapped with a sound like a rifle bolt. 2 of Rattler Kane's gangmen the sheriff had missed in the confusion pried the doors wide, dragged their wounded boss into fading daylight, and shoved a Colt Lightning into his good hand. Within minutes, they'd slipped behind the churchyard and forced their way into the one-room schoolhouse at the edge of town. Inside, 8 children and young Miss Harper were sweeping up broken glass from the morning's excitement. Now they huddled beneath chalkboards as Rattler's snarling silhouette filled the doorway. Word reached Main Street in a breathless rush. Children taken hostage. Guns reappeared. Courage wavered. Sheriff Watts cursed his own negligence. But before he could issue an order, Lila Grace Whitmore stepped from the crowd, white hair luminous in the amber light. She held no weapon, only a scrap of white cloth she'd pressed against Elias's brow moments earlier. "This ends with me," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her slender frame. "If it's payment Kane wants, I'm the debt." Elias, still bandaged but upright, lurched forward. Lila raised a pale hand. "You taught Deadwood Hollow mercy. Let me prove it strong enough to hold." Their eyes locked storm, gray and glacier, blue. Reluctantly he nodded. Lila approached the schoolhouse alone, each footstep crunching gravel loud enough to count hopes by. "Mr. Kane," she called through the open door, "trade the children for me. I follow without a fuss, you ride out free. From inside came the cruel chuckle she'd heard at auction. Walk in, Snowskin, and we'll bargain. She crossed the threshold into the humid room that smelled of chalk, dust, and fear. Rattler's blood-stained sleeve hung limp, but the lightning revolver in his left hand didn't waver. The children whimpered. Lila knelt, palms visible, meeting Kane's snake-yellow gaze. I'm here. Let them go. Before Kane answered, a tiny figure edged from behind Miss Harper's skirts. Maddie Cole, age 6, cheeks still tear-wet. She looked at the outlaw's bandaged arm with solemn curiosity. Mama says hurt people get mean, 'cause their hearts ache, she whispered. Stepping closer, she pressed a peppermint from her apron pocket into Rattler's trembling fingers. Candy helps when I'm scared. The room froze. The outlaw blinked, confusion cracking his mask of rage. No one had offered him kindness since boyhood. The peppermint felt hot as a coal in his palm. Lila saw the flicker genuine, human flare behind his eyes. She gently covered Maddie with her own arms, shielding the girl while never breaking Kane's gaze. You still have a choice, she murmured. Take mercy and ride out, or damn yourself forever in front of a child who tried to help you. Outside, Elias waited, muscles coiled. Through the doorframe he watched the silent duel of wounded Soul-San outlaw, a pale young woman, and a fearless child wielding nothing but compassion. The entire town held its breath, learning that sometimes the bravest stand is not made at gunpoint but on a splintered classroom floor, where innocence offers a peppermint to a rattlesnake and dares him to strike or change. For one long heartbeat, the peppermint seemed to soften something in Royce Kane's gaze until pain and pride clawed the moment away. His lip curled. Kindness won't buy your lives. From inside his duster, he yanked a stubby stick of dynamite, fuse already trimmed to the span of a finger. Gasps burst from the children. Miss Harper clutched too close to her skirts. Outside, Elias Boone saw the glitter of red cord and didn't waste a second. He shouldered past Sheriff Watts, kicked the door wide, and took in the scene. Lila kneeling shield, style before the children. Kane's good hand clutching both weapon and explosive, thumb flirting with a match head. Elias raised his empty palms. Royce, you light that fuse, and you'll roast right along with us. Kane's laugh rasped like gravel. Better ashes than irons, Sergeant. He struck the match on his boot heel. Phosphorus fizzed and froze as Lila stepped between him and the tinder. Her alabaster skin glowed in the dim room, almost an apparition. Look at them, she said, voice firm yet heartbreak, soft, nodding toward the youngsters huddled behind overturned desks. You came into this world with the same chance they have right now. Don't steal it. For an instant, his pupils trembled. A man teetering over a canyon he'd dug himself. But hate snapped the balance. With a hiss of spite, he touched the flame to the gritty fuse. It sparked to life, sizzling down at the speed of a racing rattler. Lila's eyes widened. Miss Harper screamed. Children whimpered. Kane pivoted, intending to hurl the stick toward a corner for maximum carnage only to collide with Elias's full-tilt charge. The farmer slammed into the outlaw like a freight car, pinning dynamite and gun hand alike against Kane's own chest. Momentum carried them all, Elias, Lila, and the outlaw, across the plank floor toward the room's thickest wall, built of limestone blocks quarried back when the army still patrolled these parts. Move the children now, Elias roared mid-flight. Miss Harper obeyed without thought, herding wide-eyed youngsters through windows whose panes had been blown out earlier that day. Lila felt calloused fingers shove her downward. She rolled under a maple desk, just as Elias locked his arms around Kane's torso, trapping the sputtering dynamite between their bodies. The outlaw's eyes went widerage, morphing into raw terror. You'll die too, he wheezed. Reckon so, Elias grunted, tightening the bear hug. Difference is, I'll be keeping a promise. The fuse vanished with a sharp pop. A concussive boom punched every eardrum in the schoolhouse, rattling windows 3 blocks away. Plaster dust geysered rafters groaned, and the stone corner disintegrated in a billow of grit and smoke. Splinters rained like hail. Then came an eerie lull broken only by the crackle of small flames licking scattered primers and copybooks. Outside, townsfolk rushed forward, Doc Maynard at the lead. Through swirling dust, they found Lila crawling from beneath the collapsed desk, dress singed but skin unbroken. Her silver-blue eyes scanned the rubble with frantic purpose until they caught a shape beside the breached wall. Elias, sprawled atop Royce Kane's lifeless form. Blood trickled from a scalp cut, his torn sleeve smoldered. Yet when Doc pressed fingers to the farmer's neck, a pulse thudded slow, stubborn, alive. He had twisted at the last instant, turning his own body into a shield. The stone foundation absorbed most of the blast. Kane, pinned beneath, bore the brunt and would menace the town no more. One by one, the children emerged unharmed, soot-smudged but laughing shaky laughs. Sheriff Watts exhaled a prayer while townspeople formed a bucket chain to douse the small fires. Lila knelt beside Elias, took his tremoring hand-scarred, short 2 fingers, yet miraculous in its strength, and pressed it to her tear-damp cheek. "You kept every promise," she whispered, voice breaking. "Now stay and see what mercy you bought." Behind them, the noon-born courage of Deadwood Hollow steadied into evening resolve, proof that when one soul chooses sacrificial bravery, a whole town can remember how to live. After the flames were quenched and the children sent home clutching peppermint rewards, Doc Maynard set up a makeshift infirmary inside the parsonage. Elias lay on a horsehair sofa, shirt slit open, so the physician could stitch the 4-inch gash along his ribs. Lila Grace knelt beside him, blotting soot from his brow with a damp muslin cloth. When she eased his leather coat onto a chair, something slipped from the inside Poqueta sepia photograph, no larger than a playing card, its edges soft from years of handling. She turned it over. A young woman, the same snow-white hair, the same glacial blue eyes smiled, beside a cedar plank farmhouse. Scrawled on the back in iron gall ink, "My dearest Emma Ruth Boone, age 18 months forever, Daddy's treasure." Lila's breath hitched. The toddler's face, round and luminous, could have been her own mirrored from infancy. Her pulse thundered as puzzle pieces long scattered clicked into place. Doc Maynard noticed her pallor. "You found it," he said quietly, knotting the final suture with surgeon's precision. "I wondered how long before Providence put that picture in your hands." The old doctor wiped his spectacles, voice lowering so the dozing Elias couldn't hear. "Your full name is Emma Ruth Boone. When your mother died of fever 16 winters back, Elias, still serving cavalry duty, believed a war-wounded widower unfit to raise a fragile child. He entrusted you to your aunt in Austin, swore he'd watch from afar until he'd earned the right to step back in." Lila Emma felt tears blur the photograph. "He let me think I was alone all these years." "He let you live," Maynard corrected gently, "and he never stopped paying your aunt's debts. Never missed a birthday letter, Evan. When the cards came back, marked Return to Sender, after the stagecoach robbery 2 summers ago." Elias stirred then, eyes clouded with pain yet startlingly alert. They settled on the picture, trembling in Lila's grasp. His weathered face crumpled. "Emma," he rasped, voice hoarse from smoke and emotion, "I carried you in my heart every mile." She tried to speak, but managed only a whisper. "Why didn't you come sooner?" "I was half a man after Fort Griffin," he said, gaze pleading. "Had to learn mercy before I could teach it. Today God finally let me stand between you and darkness like a father should." The parsonage clock chimed 6, sunlight angling through gingham curtains, bathing the room in warm gold. Lila pressed the photo to her chest, then folded Elias's scarred hand between both of hers. "I lost a name but found a lifetime," she said, tears slipping free. "If you'll have me, Daddy, I'd like to start over right here, right now." A breath, he'd been holding for 16 years eased from Elias's lungs. "Home's yours," he whispered, voice breaking like soft timber. Outside, Deadwood Hollow's bell tower tolled evening service, its peal rolling over a town reborn known family, and one truth at a time. Winter came early that year, frosting the black iron fence around the Boone farm with lace so delicate it looked hand-stitched. Inside the cedar plank house, a potbelly stove glowed cherry red, warming a room where Elias eased into his rocker and watched Emma no longer Lila Grace, but his daughter in name and Fackthang blue spruce garland along the mantel. The farm had grown since autumn. 60 acres of bottomland beside the Brazos, 2 milk cows, a barn painted the color of ripe apples. Sheriff Watts and Ruby May had shown up with hammer and nails. The children Elias saved planted saplings along the schoolyard, their mittened hands patting soil the way you'd hush a baby. Even the church bell rang truer, its bronze throat freshly polished, its voice carrying a promise that Deadwood Hollow would never again trade its future for a fistful of silver. On Christmas Eve, Emma placed the last hand-carved ornamenta, tiny peppermint stick, whittled from cedar near the top of the tree. She glanced at her father, now dozing with a smile, soft as new snow. In his lap lay the sepia photograph of a toddler named Emma Ruth Boone. Beside it rested today's tintype, taken on the courthouse steps, daughter and father, shoulder to shoulder, beneath the words, "Justice served." 2 pictures, 16 years apart, yet one continuous story, a love that wandered but never quit. Life lesson. Sometimes the greatest courage isn't pulling a trigger or standing in a dusty street at high noon. It's choosing mercy when revenge feels easier, returning when shame says, "Stay away," and believing you're still worthy of a second chance, whether you're 18 with albinism or 68 with regrets. Mercy doesn't erase scars. It plants something living within them. And when forgiveness finally takes root, it can turn a frightened towner, a fragile heart, into fertile ground. If this story touched a tender place in you, tell us in the comments, who showed you mercy when you least deserved it, and how did that grace change your life's course? Your wisdom might be the warmth someone else needs tonight. For more true-hearted Western tales about redemption, family, and the quiet power of doing what's right, tap subscribe and ring the bell. Each week, we'll ride together into another story where courage wears work boots and hope gets its hands dirty. Don't miss the next chapter. See you on the trail.